The Noodle Tree by J.P. O'Brien. In the centre of Arbor Park grew the most remarkable tree that anyone had ever seen. It was notable not just for its size or its age, but for the long strands of yellowy white vines that cascaded from its branches. As any proud local would be quick to tell you, these were no ordinary vines. They were magic. As the story goes, a band of weary travellers to the region were first attracted by the unique colour and lushness of this tree as they headed south in search of what would later come to be known as the Chipper River. Evidently motivated enough by hunger from their arduous travels to try to eat the dangling strands, they were astonished to find that they would grow back the second they were ripped down. The explorers, mesmerised by this seemingly limitless supply of delicious nourishment, decided to settle there. A thriving town quickly grew, and the legend of the Noodle Tree attracted curious travellers from far and wide. Unfortunately, the tantalising magic of the tree had lately piqued the interest of an enterprising businessman, Abel Sterling, who keenly noted its popularity amongst tourists and eyed the park's lucrative but hitherto wasted economic potential. Behind closed doors, he had begun negotiating a deal with the town's administration to purchase the land on which Arbor Park sat. Though details of the deal remained ambiguous, locals were wary. The tree stood at the heart of their beloved community, and everyone, young and old, understood its significance. Some were horrified to think they would soon be charged admission to view it, while others feared Arbor Park may become plastered with hideous advertisements or tasteless sponsors. Some of the younger, more impressionable children thought the plan involved chopping the tree down in order to print literal money. It was only when the contracts had been signed that the specifics started to come out. Mr. Sterling would not be using the tree to print money, but would instead be building a restaurant. With an open-roofed kitchen encircling the tree's trunk, its chefs would be able to reach up and grab the vines, plop them into large cauldrons of broth, then serve them as a noodle soup to paying customers. The proposed establishment would be named the Noodle Tree. News of the plan was not well received. Mr. Sterling soon found himself in the middle of a local scandal, but was quick to deflect contestations by stating that nothing untoward was actually happening to the tree. Visitors to the park could continue to come and witness the magic for themselves, in the sense that they could watch the chefs at work pulling down the vines. They would be more than welcome to take photos alongside the kitchen bar, provided they didn't actually enter the kitchen, of course. And by simply purchasing a delicious meal, they would be growing the reputation of this local business and, quote, helping to preserve the Noodle Tree for generations to come. A number of displeased residents quickly organised themselves into the Hands Off Our Tree alliance, decrying the administration's decision with handmade flyers calling to tear up Mr. Sterling's contract. The leader of the so-called Hooters, a single mother named Vicki Harper, had her own reasons for fighting back. When she had first moved to the town with her young son Ash several years before, she had won him over with the idea that a special kind of magic existed there. While Ash had indeed been captivated, as all young children are, by the miraculous regrowth of the tree's vines, for Vicki it was a little more symbolic. She loved the idea that anything, or anyone, could start fresh again in an instant. For a short while, it seemed as if the Hooters grassroots flyer campaign had succeeded. There had been no updates about the restaurant, and Mr. Sterling was assumed to have moved on to some other, less troublesome town. But one morning, as the sleepy dawn light started to creep over Arbor Park, the dog walkers and joggers stumbled upon a line of freshly erected cordons and trucks parked on the dirt around the tree. Construction had begun. Vicki Harper hastily assembled the Hooters along the edge of the building site. Waving placards in the air, They recited chants and booed the construction workers as they unloaded the building materials. "What they're doing is destroying this town," Vicki rallied through her megaphone. "They don't care about us. It's shameless greed, nothing more." Her words stimulated tremendous local pride, including in the younger generation. Ash and his two best friends, Liam and Caleb, all now in their teens, were eager to join in. Ash had been particularly roused by his mother's proclamation that this vile act of cash grabbery will not stand in our park. Liam and Caleb were mainly along for the booing. But the protests soon attracted the ire of Mr. Sterling, who felt that his generous injection of funds into the community was going wholly unappreciated. He began urging the local council to curb these hateful acts of civic unrest and make a public example out of Vicki. The protests were hit hard when a large group of police officers showed up the following afternoon, threatening jail time. Several of the hooters left, but Vicki stood strong. "He's scared," she said to Ash over dinner that night. "That just means it's working." Despite the disruptive presence along the construction site fence, work continued at an alarming pace. Over the next 2 weeks, Mr. Sterling's builders crawled all over the site like worker ants, digging up large swaths of ground around the tree for the pipes and cables, laying the floors over its roots, and putting up the walls. The landscape was changing so rapidly, in fact, it was difficult to spot the microscopic effects that the construction was having on the tree itself. Some of its outer branches were starting to gently sag, and 1 or 2 discoloured patches had already appeared on the creamy vines. To make things worse, the few remaining protesters were dismayed to see their efforts just weren't having the impact they'd hoped. Only 3 weeks after first lining the fences, their numbers had diminished to almost nothing. Even Ash and his friends had given up and left. Mr. Sterling was delighted to find that there was actually no need to prosecute the outspoken Ms. Harper after all. The community's apathy appeared to be doing the job for him. In time, Vicki was left fighting the battle alone. By now, Ash, Liam and Caleb had instead taken to watching the building's progress from a concrete ledge a short distance away. But Ash in particular was frustrated that the side of authority seemed to be winning out over the side of rebellion so easily. "That's not how it works in movies," he lamented. "We should have stood up to the police." "We would have gone to jail," said Caleb. "Obviously we wouldn't have. They couldn't arrest the whole town." Just then, a huge sign displaying the restaurant's name in gaudy illuminated tubing was hauled out of the back of a truck by a dozen men. "That's it," interrupted Liam. "They've basically finished." She couldn't stop it. They watched sadly as construction workers bored into the lower branches of the tree with heavy drills, then hung the sign above the entranceway with bolts and chains. The stress of supporting the weight had an immediately noticeable effect on the tree. Several of the branches were now starting to droop and crack. On the other side of the fence from the workmen, Vicki hung her head. "Your poor mum," said Caleb. But Ash was coming up with a plan. That night, under cover of darkness, he waited for Liam and Caleb at the gates of the park. His shoulder was weighed down by whatever was in his backpack. "The signs and chanting didn't work," he said when they walked up. "It's time to do something real." "What are you going to do?" asked Liam. "We," corrected Ash, "are going to tear that sign down." "We can't do that," said Caleb. "We'll get in so much trouble." "Yeah, plus we're just kids." "Forget trouble. Forget kids. Don't you want to be a hero?" "Well, this is really important. My mum is the only person who seems to get it. And anyway," he grinned as he pulled 3 Halloween masks out of his backpack, "no one will know it was us." Caleb and Liam were still looking uneasily at each other as the now masked Ash darted through the gates. At that moment, Vicki was lying awake in bed, totally unaware of her son's absence from his room. "It's useless," she softly told the ceiling. "I can't believe something like this can really happen, but I guess it can." She got up and went to the kitchen to make herself some chamomile tea to try and relax. She was too distracted by her thoughts to bother turning on the light in the hallway. If she had, she perhaps would have noticed the toolbox sitting beside the front door, open, and with several of its items missing. "How are we going to climb that?" asked Caleb, trying to catch his breath beneath his Freddy Krueger mask. Ash and Liam were already looking up at the chain-link fence. "Don't be such a baby," goaded Ash. He took a few steps back, then charged full speed at the fence. He jumped and grasped at the chain links. But before he even had time to find his footing, the upright poles buckled under his momentum and tipped forward against the brick wall, smashing one of the restaurant's windows. "Oops," he said, still clutching it. "Not what I'd planned." "We're in so much trouble," reiterated Caleb. "Hold on," said Liam, seeing that the fallen fence panel had now created a neat ramp for them. He scurried past Ash and was standing on the top side of the wall in no time. "Ta-da!" he said. Once Ash had joined him, the two of them tiptoed along the top of the wall one after the other, holding onto the dangling noodles for balance. "Guys, be careful," called up Caleb from solid ground. When they got to the sign, Ash straddled the top of the wall to free up his hands, then reached into his backpack for a spanner. "I don't know," said Liam. "It took like 20 guys to lift this up. What are you going to do on your own?" Ash didn't answer. He was concentrating on undoing the first bolt from its hole. But he was surprised to find that it required almost no effort at all. The branches that had been drilled now appeared to be rotten at the point of disintegrating. The bolt fell right out. "Wait, what's that?" In an instant, the lower branch nearest Ash gave way. He tumbled forward and threw back a hand to desperately grab a hold of the wall. The spanner went spinning through the air. The sign swung in a big arc and ripped its remaining bolts out of the tree, then clattered down to the floor of the restaurant with a tremendous metallic smash. When the sound had died down, Liam helped Ash heave himself up onto the wall again to catch his breath. They looked over to the branches and peered into the holes that the bolts had left. The tree was so rotten inside, it was almost totally hollow. Ash leaned forward and attempted to knock his knuckles against it, but it just gave way immediately, like soggy cardboard. "Oh man, the tree," whimpered Caleb. "This wasn't us," replied Ash. "It was already rotten." Liam looked down and saw the devastation the fallen sign had caused. It had taken an enormous chunk out of the restaurant's doorway and wall, and the tubing itself had smashed into 1,000 pieces that now lay scattered across the floor. "We gotta get out of here," urged Liam. The boys scampered back out of the restaurant and fled. When Vicki Harper arrived in Arbor Park the next day, she was too distracted by the sight of the tree itself to even register the damage to the restaurant building. The noodle-like vines, which had always grown with such luxuriant abundance, were now nothing more than thin spindles. Rather than their beautiful creamy white, they had mostly turned a sickly shade of mouldy brown, and the trunk and branches were nothing more than a black, decaying skeleton. The dead vines continued to crumble off and litter the ground as more people gathered to get a closer look. The place was completely overrun with a rancid smell and looked like a hurricane had hit it. When Mr. Sterling arrived, he was inconsolably furious. "My building!" he shouted. "I ought to have every last one of you protesters arrested." "We didn't do this," argued Vicki. Your workers drilled holes into our beloved tree and destroyed it. You're a monster. The businessman tried to argue back, but before long the entire crowd was drowning him out with their boos. You've sucked it dry! Get out! There's no more money for you here, you creep! Mr. Sterling raised his hand to his head. Even putting aside the cost of reconstructing the walls, no tourist would ever want to eat in a restaurant sitting in the shade of a decaying, crumbling tree, he thought. Not to mention that one pesky protester woman who would never let him rest even if he somehow could open. The only course of action was to write the whole thing off. His golden goose had turned out to be a white elephant. The restaurant had never even opened its doors. Crestfallen, he pushed his way out through the heckling crowd as Vicki Harper stood her ground and watched. The battle had been won, but it was a decidedly hollow victory. She didn't feel like cheering. She felt like crying. In the days that followed, the wreck of the Noodle Tree restaurant was pulled down and its debris removed. Once the last remnants of the ill-fated project were carted away, the townspeople gathered around the dead land to mourn the loss of their beloved Noodle Tree. By now, its rotten remains had disintegrated. Where it had once stood so majestically, there was just emptiness left, a sad circle of nothing. Vicki Harper reassembled the Hooters to dedicate a memorial plaque on the site. She wanted everyone to remember that putting the town's integrity up for sale had come at a considerable price. Meanwhile, Ash's conscience, with a lot of encouragement from Caleb, finally urged him to tell his mother what had happened the night the sign collapsed. He explained that they had set out to make a difference, but admitted that they had made things so much worse. "That's not how you win these things," Vicki said. "There is a right way and a wrong way to fight. Do you understand?" "I'm sorry. I saw how hard you were fighting. I just wanted to help." She looked him in the eyes. With his spirit for seeking justice, he was undoubtedly her child. She couldn't help but laugh. In her heart, she had no idea how to teach him how to know the right way and the wrong way. She had to just trust he would take this experience forward with him, and it would help him make that decision himself. In the end, Ash felt he got off relatively lightly. He was signed up for 50 hours of community service cleaning Arbor Park at his mother's insistence, although she made it clear he was to keep his whereabouts on the night of the trespassing a firm secret. It was when he was trimming back some of the overgrown grass a short distance away from the new memorial that an object glinting in the sun caught his eye. He wandered over and pushed the grass aside with his foot. It was the spanner. He bent down to stuff it into his pocket, but stopped when he noticed a plant growing underneath. A creamy white plant sprouting its head out of the soil.
You have been listening to JP O'Brien's Stories. For more, visit patreon.com/JP O'Brien Stories.